boyfriend, girlfriend in 6th grade, usually 8th grade. 6th grade, that's we're
There's
in
still
7th grade,
some
thinking about it, 8th grade, yeah.
Right, 6th graders.
Gosh, I remember, I mean, so we were seeing so much, I didn't even start doing.
All right.
High school.
But in elementary school, 5th graders, they're
No,
still
but
little-
after
little
ballroom,
guys.
they get a little, it's okay.
After ballroom.
We do a ballroom unit.
Also,
We might be, so we're all a family, we're just friends,
No kids.
dancing. No girlfriend, boy,
That's how it's-
girl cuties.
I saw flashing. So I know what it is.
Yan Hawane, Cheese Klein. We're probably gonna start late and end early today, but you guys can go watch the sunsets, or there's the Tana art auction tonight. Shukwai Yachtuasaku Pa Achlikat Yuch Achtatan. Keuchne Ayadisai, Tekakhinach Nor Marks down how. Kakonach Ayaji would nay. Hayuchatangida. Ha Hakosti. Akho Atlatur Sati Owa Ajoy Achtu Unique. Yakonach de Irachat with Latish. Yachtuasaku Shukwa de Yuchatangi Ayayi Achi. Ushkanach to the art. Ajoy de Huch Ayahanakugud. Ho'awetzer Yajin Jiwane Hayuchatangida. Akawe a itch. Ushkanach to the art. Ajoy we yeshkasniki kukuda da yuch out to the art. Aka Kone Ayaha ide yuch ewatan. Tletsin tin yuch ewatan. Adat Ayaha Yajini. Yewa ade ausakhani yeha yuchatangi. Kakonach to wasagu yo to a daki. Adrishuko aya de yuchatangi to wasagu to a I want to talk about Nora Marks Dowenhauer. Her Tlingit name is Keuchne. And she was my teacher, she was my grandmother to me. And I miss her very much. When I want us to hear her voice because she always had really important things to say. And there's videos out there on YouTube that you can find of her, of reading her poetry. There's a movie I made about her and Richard and their life and their work. And there's a video of her telling Raven and a Deer story, which is really good. And then I put this video up the other day, just thinking of, there was a group of us working on this Raven book, and we're trying to get it wrapped up. And Richard Dowenhauer had been kind of the project coordinator for a long time. And it's been funded through Sea Alaska and then grants that the group Tlingit Readers had when it was functioning. And we went to Richard Dowenhauer's funeral. And then afterwards, the only time that really worked for us to meet, because we had people flying into town who were also working on this project, it includes Carrie Eggleston, who's a name you guys should know. She's done a tremendous amount of amazing stuff for the Tlingit language. She has a doctorate in applied linguistics through the University of Alaska Fairbanks. Let's see, James Crippen was there. He came into town. He's a linguist. He was born in Wrangell. Carrie was born in Haines. James was born in Wrangell. His Tlingit name is Zeush. Carrie's is Chagi Shabu. And Zeush is a fun name because it's a Tlingitized version of James, and his name is James. So Zeush, and it's an old name that their clan has. He's done a ton of work as well in our language, really trying to document some of the finer points. And as you learn more Tlingit, you'll find you can go so far into this, so far there, and it just, the complexity of Tlingit, it goes on and on and on. It's very exciting. Ishmael Hope is another member of the team. He lives here in Juneau and is a wonderful translator of Tlingit and storyteller. And then, so that was the gang. And then Nora. Kathy Colehorse Ruddy Steoteen is also a project coordinator. She was the legal executor of the English intellectual property of Richard Downhill. And so we got together, and there was a guy named Michael Travis who's a bookmaker and a graphic designer. And we got together, and it was really intense because we just finished the funeral, and we all felt really for Nora because Richard took such good care of her, such good care of her. And as we kind of start the meeting, Dashini Mary Folletti was also there, who's an excellent language teacher. And her daughter was there. She was really young. And so Nora just sort of launched into this Tlingit speech. You know, as you hang out with people who could speak Tlingit, sometimes they just move into this speech-making mode. And if you didn't speak Tlingit, I'm sure you could feel that it was something important. And if you do understand Tlingit, then you get that there's this real gravity that they sort of grab onto, because the language has its uses in times like this. It really does, in terms of comforting people and sharing your feelings. And she gave us this speech, and as she's giving it to us, I just couldn't help but be amazed that, you know, we should be the ones giving her some kind of inspirational speech, but she was giving it to us to keep going and to keep working. So it's a video. It's got subtitles. It's pretty short, but I got to give Kathy Ruddy an awful lot of credit because she's been around the language a long time, and she's not a speaker of it, but she knew that something important was happening, and she took her phone out and she recorded this. So when she sent me the recording, I sat down with Nora and we just went over it to make sure that I had it as accurate as I could, what she was trying to tell us in that moment. So we'll start with that.
Sa Tlingit xete. Wasago sa Tlingit xete. Wasago Tlingit overskuko. Ka awadu hastu ita shi. Ye awa aktu chete. Aktu yake ye hon atayan dek yek on now. Cheers. I have to collect my thoughts. Hajjana patak connects a hawaiian. Where I think that you got hunger. I could at call that Utusiku Ahoa Ohan. A tower here haunch. At the end of Cappuccino Maker. Has to hold the coffee at. Has to in Hokanainik. I think that you got hunger, ya Ka, you got hunger, Siku. Has to. Hanhiko de get Kaswasa Oteyo, as Kanayos. As to in Kanayni goes a Kolinogo. Sometimes Kaji to create it, you know, it's kind of hard to do. Aka awa ko tashi sometimes psychotic. Continuous you to take the cotton getting. Ajawa in Kohanik has to Hanayat. Kafisaku Godakasa Tlingit Yuhatanga Siku as digital you the Tonga sector. A corporation to Nakakisaku. Take a Sihana and the Gahinak. Take Chakutka. Johan Jaya Akagayis, you to get to Ajaya Akatuhotan, you Konahi Katuhotan. Edengo Koti. Yeah. Yeah, cook, yeah.
Okay. Any thoughts or reactions on what we just saw and heard?
When I was watching the video of the class when she visited, I think you had said that the first time that they gathered to do this book was kind of the start of celebration. Was that right? That this group of elders that came together to work on this kind of inspired this?
Well, there was a gathering during celebration. And when they had the idea to do the Raven book, I have to look through kind of some of Richard's notes, but it's a project that's been going on for a long time. And it goes way back probably to, I think the 1960s are probably the oldest recordings we have. And then some of them were from De Laguna, and I can't remember when she came. But so like, one of the stories would be from Frank Italio, and I'll just put it up for a second here. So this book that's going to come out, it's huge. It's like over 600 pages so far. And so Frank Italio is the first speaker. And so the way that, so 1952, this is the oldest recording we have is 1952. And it's in Yakutat, and it's a very challenging sort of style of Tlingit, just because people don't, they just talk a little different. Well, for example, Nora was 90, and this is Nora's mother's father. So I'm sitting down with Nora, and we're writing down the Tlingit from her great-grandfather. And it was just amazing. It's amazing to sit and to listen. And there's certain terminologies, I think, that don't get used a whole lot anymore. But Frederica de Laguna was the one who recorded this. And then there's been several work sessions. I was in a class when we're working on one of these stories. It was actually, let's see, this one by Aukta Datkustu Achch. So this one was recorded in 1963 in Angoon by Constance Naish and Gillian Story. And this one is about Yaqisku Qayq, which is Raven's uncle. And we'll listen to this maybe next time. But I just want to call attention to sort of one part, which was Raven, the sort of condensed version of the story is Raven's uncle, there's this guy named Yoqiskel Qeq, which translates to tide controller. And he has a wife, and he's in charge of everything, and he has a sister. And his sister, when she just thinks about having a baby, she has a baby. And then he always kills, and they're always boys, and he always kills them. And he's got these methods of killing them. And so she's really upset, and she's crying on the beach, and Tlach is the name of this bird, a heron, comes up to her and says, "Why are you crying?" She says, "Why?" And then he says, "Well, go find this stone and put it in the fire, and after it's cooled down where you can touch it, he says, swallow it, and then you'll have this baby that nothing can kill." And she did, and that's where Raven was born. And so he tries all these tricks to kill Raven, and Raven, nothing can kill him, right? So then later they're fighting over the tide, and his uncle wins, and the world floods. And so Raven takes care of his mom so that she's safe. Then he goes and he pokes his beak up into the sky. And so he's up there. And so there's several different versions, like means poking the nose through a cloud. And so in this version, that's what he turns his mother into. I don't know what it is. It's probably some kind of snipe. There's other versions where it's Gutsyadutli, which is the name for not a crane. It translates to the Gutsyadutli, the crane on the face of the cloud, and it's a sandpiper. And then there's other versions where he turns her into Tuchgah, which is a black duck, the ducks that go out there and show you where the salmon are. So he's sitting up here, and he does this really neat thing, Raven, where when he wants something to happen, he uses what we call hortative verbs. They're very interesting in Tlingit, but basically, as Christmas season begins to come around, people will hear this song where they'll say, "Let it snow, let it snow." So let it happen, let it be, that's a hortative verb. And so let me have some, let's go to the movies, those are all hortative verbs. And we know how to put them together in English, but when you put them together in Tlingit, they do some really unusual things. For example, if you say, let it, Tlingit exists, you'd say Tlingit qudzati. So qudzati would be the verb. But if you say let Tlingit exist, you'd say Tlingit quqaqasti. So it gets a couple of extra things in the front. As we work with more verbs, we'll learn everything's in the front. That's where all the magic happens. It's right in the front of the verb. And anyways, so Raven uses those a lot, and he tends to sing them. Whenever people are telling these stories, they get to these parts. So they'd say something like, "Kaja kade kushe, kaja kade kushe." Then there's other versions where they say, "Kaja kat kushe kat kakaskit." Let me fall on kaja. And in this story, he says kaja kakao zagit. And then he kind of goes on about kaja. And I remember there's this part when we were working on this particular story. Let's see if they have it. I thought it was in this one, but maybe not. Oh, here it is. So he's saying kaja, and he says chao kawuchi yasak chuyi dadide. It's been called that from long ago up until today. And he's talking about this thing called kaja. Then he says it again, kaja. And he says, Yidat Tlingit the Tlingit people, and this means the Tlingit of today, the people of today, don't know what it is. And I remember we were in that class, and then Nora says, "Well, what is it?" Because he kept saying kaja, and we're working on translating it. And I said, "I'm a Tlingit of today, I don't know." And she told us it was this dried kelp island. Like, so sometimes bull kelp gets mixed up with other kelps, and then the sun dries it on top of the ocean. And it's like an island, it floats around. And then it turns out there's several other names for it, like Kush to Yagu, if the landowners want to go somewhere, they'll turn it into a boat. And if you're stuck on an island somewhere, and those landowners come to try and take you, and if you're strong enough to resist them, you might see them like just going off on this kelp island, you know. And so, because that word it was a neat experience, I thought that that word would be there, and it felt like we almost lost track of that word. And so I told my wife, I said, whenever we have a son, I want to name him Kaja, because it just seemed like a good boy name. So I have a little son named Kaja. And it comes from that moment, which involves Noah, and it involves this particular story. But yeah, so this book should come out probably next year, and it's gonna be really fun. And we've got all the audio. I could share some of these draft chapters with you guys, and we've got the audio to it as well. And we're hoping, it was always Richard's hope, that we would find ways to use these narratives a lot more than we do. I think what they're used now, but they're usually just, hey, you guys read this, and they only read the English. And we have the audio for most of them. There's some we still got to track down, but there's a lot of different exercises I think that could be done using some of these stories, putting them maybe into some sort of, you know, because what I tend to do is I'll make a slideshow. So it's a slideshow. And then from a slideshow, you can export it. And then you could put it into a little movie making software, and you can make a movie, right? And it's kind of technologically intensive, but there's a lot you can do with that, so that now you can make some kind of movie. And I always try to make the Tlingit really big and the English really small. And I know that when people are first encountering it, they're probably going to just sort of read the English, but then maybe they'll listen to it again. And that's also the thing with these recordings, is once you've listened to it once and then you've looked at the English, you should know what that translation is. So then you kind of keep listening to it, and you try and help your brain get from one language to the other. It serves as kind of a bridge, because the unfortunate reality is that we're getting really low on speakers. You know, so that's the thing we've talked about a lot this week. Me with some of my colleagues, is we're running out of people we can ask the really hard questions to, because sometimes we get stuck. And so I sit and I translate work with 90-year-olds, and sometimes we just get stuck. And so as we just had this awareness that pool is shrinking, it puts a little bit of pressure on. But then we also look at things like this and see, like, she was giving us a very inspirational speech here when she's saying things like, it's only going to be you who are standing up for this language. And when she's saying that, she's not saying you're going to be alone, but she's saying, look at who you are. And as you encounter this, and as you're learning the language, you should have a realization that you're part of the group. You're a part of the group that stands up for Tlingit. And so there's a lot to be said for that, because there's a lot of people who say, for a variety of reasons, I wish I could, I want to, I'd like to, but then to actually engage and to do it, it's something that I think deserves a lot of credit.
I liked when in the recording, where she talked about, or you mentioned, that she normalized the recording aspect of it, because there was such a fear of like being recorded, but yet she would just go around with her tape recorder and start capturing it, so that it became something comfortable, and that folks would actually want to have to say something before they passed, so that it could be shared with the community. Yeah,
because it seems like, you know, so De Laguna had come up, and Swanton had been here, but only got a couple of things. Most of his stuff, his real recordings, were with Haida. So De Laguna comes up, and she gets a bunch of stuff. And then Nation Story, they come up, and they get a bunch of stuff. But they're even though I think De Laguna could speak serviceable Tlingit, and Jillian, what Nation Story, they could speak Tlingit for a while. And so that would just really freak people out, kind of. You know, there were these missionary white ladies, and they'd show up on the door, and they would just speak Tlingit, and they said some people would just slam the door because they just kind of freaked out about it. Because at the time, like, you knew the non-Tlingit people who spoke Tlingit, because there were really only a couple of them, just a couple. There was this guy who ran a shop down here in Juneau, and people would tell us the stories about him, and his was so good that there's a book by Elizabeth Nyman and Jeff Lear, and she was telling the story in Tlingit, and she said her dad would take her there because that shopkeeper would say, let your daughter stay with me for a while. She talks Tlingit like the old people. And so it was really neat to have somebody that was kind of like that. And so Richard Dowenhauer was another one. When he'd stand up and start speaking, and people, it would be really neat for them to see, but it was really unusual. And Jeff Lear was another one. So Nora said when she first met Jeff Lear, she was down on a dock working, and she heard someone speak Tlingit to her, and she looked down, she saw these extra tufts, and she looked up, and here's like this 18-year-old white kid from Chicago, and he was like a linguistic genius, so he could just speak it. And so he learned it really, really well. But yeah, I think a lot of the old people, but then when Nora starts, she's kind of this insider, right? She is a Tlingit person. But then part of her story was she was teaching here in Juneau at a high school, and she said the kids really liked it, and they were picking it up. And then they said, well, you need to have at least a bachelor's degree to teach here. And so they let her go, they fired her. And so she went to school. So she went to Alaska Methodist University, and she was there with Rosita Worrell and several others. And she met Richard Dowenhauer there, and they worked really closely, and they ended up getting together and getting married, and they came down here. And then she wanted to go back in the school and teach. And then they said, well, there's no money to do that anymore. We're not going to do that. So, she was also she and Richard were really on front line with others. Dennis Demert and Walter Soboloff and then Andy Hope III and many others to really push for Tlingit language and culture to be a part of education. And so those of us who are out there teaching, like Jessica Chester and Hans Chester and others who are teaching in schools, it's in Wrangell, it's in the school in Cake, it's in the school in Huna, Sitka, Yakutat. It's because a lot of these folks were blazing a trail, and there were ones before them who were doing the same thing. Bob Zuboff and Frank Johnson, A.P. Johnson, going into classes in these old Juneau Indian Studies programs, and Johnny Marks and Eva Marks. So it's really fun to sort of to reflect on that. And she was part of this transition, though, where the old people, they were scared. They didn't like their voice to be captured on a video or on audio, sorry. And part of it was just a new thing, and it was, Tlingits get pretty scared of a lot of stuff. They get scared of all kinds of stuff. And then the other thing was, you live in a culture where everything has just been taken from you. Your land, your fishing rights, your knowledge, people just go write books, and your art, and it just all gets commodified and taken. So you get pretty scared to share it. But by the end, it didn't take long. And then all these people, hey, come record me. Hey, come record my uncle. And she's talked a lot about when her uncle, David Kadishan, was dying. And his wife, Ida, called Nora and said, get your recording, come over here. Your uncle's dying, and he wants to be recorded one last time. And she said she didn't even pack clothes. She just grabbed her thing and just jumped on a plane and went to Huna. And so it was really fascinating to listen to her life and how it contributes. I think with her and Vesta Dominics and Florence Shakely and many others, like if we're sitting here 50 years from now or whatever, and Tlingit's still around, they're the reason why. All right, so let's get back to our lessons. Anybody got any language thoughts or questions before we move into our material?
I have some questions about codes. Potatoes.
Uh-huh.
And so a couple. One, I wondered if any of the Marie Miller codes were in the seed library.
Oh, yeah. There's there is like some kind of potato seed library, and yeah, they have them there. I don't think they have the Haida potato though, which is like shame on them. But the Haida potato is also hard to get. I'm gonna get some from Jean Briney one of these days. She has them, and so the Haida potato comes to Southeast Alaska much later than the Marie potato. So the Marie potato is certainly, it's probably just always been here. As far as who knows when, right? Tlingit people have just planted potatoes for a long, long time, and they could trace them to Chile. And, you know, that's going back 20, 30,000 years. And then the Haida potato had been in sort of the Seattle kind of area or Washington kind of area. And there's a Haida elder named Julie Coburn. And when she was young, she and her family, they got in a rowboat and they rowed down to that area from Kasan. And they traded some of these potatoes and they brought them back up, and they've been harvesting them ever since. So, yeah, and I think Betsy Kanubi probably has some, and I know that there's some at the Downhauer still have some. I'll have to ask the family what they're gonna do. Richard was really a potato guy, but I have to see if they're gonna keep those going.
So then my follow-up was, is there a new potato guy or potato guy? Is there somebody locally who's like making sure the potatoes are...
That's a good question. It's probably, I'll have to ask their kids if they're going to keep it going. Betsy is probably the one, Betsy Kanube, and she was in that film, and she did, we used to call her the potato lady because she was so into potatoes. And so she did a doctorate. She got her doctorate in potato sort of horticulture. It's really focused on these specific potatoes.
And then I wondered, I heard that when there was a military presence in Juneau, they farmed potatoes at Eagle Beach.
Oh.
And I wondered what kind of potatoes they farmed.
That's a good question. Like if they were local or not, because these particular potatoes, what Nora said, was one of her grandpa, I think, Jacqueline, Jim Negatuck, maybe? I can't remember which one of her grandpas, but he would fill up a canoe and then he would paddle out to a little island, and then they would get him above the tide line, but where it's still sloping down, and then they would plant him in there because they really liked that kind of soil. And then they'd take the canoe back out, and then they'd fill it full of seaweed, go back, put the seaweed all on top of where they planted those potatoes, and they'd do that in the spring. Then they'd take off, and then they'd go back, and they wouldn't go back to fall time, but then they would fill that canoe just up totally full of potatoes. It's really a big part of Tlingit culture.
Did they just plant those underneath the moss?
I think they planted them above the tide line, but in spots where there wasn't really any grass or moss, just right on the kind of dirt that's just above the tide line. And now, yeah, you could just get your gardens going outside your house. Yeah, they'll grow pretty good. They're little fingerling potatoes. Okay. So how far did those videos go? What did you guys get up to? Like chapter 1, 2? How far does it go? That's away, and okay, good. All right, we'll do some of that.
I had a quick question. I think it came up, and I can't find it. I thought it's in the email that you sent me of like, it's good to see all of you come here, and it ended with a Y-I. Is it?
Oh.
Because I heard that sometimes when a word ends in I, it might be E instead. Is that the case for the welcome? I can't find the
Okay, so yeah, we'll sort
email
of jump
that you sent me
ahead.
with that. I was trying to translate a song, and
Oh, right.
it's good that you've all come together, and it was a Y
Oh,
at the
okay.
end, and I didn't know if it was ye.
Well, there's something similar here. So you could say like satini, and the I on the end of here is like, because if I say satin, that means I see you. But I say satini, and it gets this little suffix because that's the good thing, right? So I could say so hat yagut would be you came here. Hat yagudi. So it gets that. It gets its. For now, I would say think of it as an I. It could go long too. Like you could say satini. You could say satini. It could be when there's certain vowel endings that could go long or short and it doesn't affect anything. And so that's certainly one of them. And so if you say Ike hati ati would be, it's good you all came here. That's another one that could be like that too. Okay.
I'm having a little bit of trouble right now hearing the difference between some of the K sounds.
Yeah.
You know, the K and the K with apostrophe and the K, the line under, and same with the X
Okay.
sounds, and I would just love to practice.
Yeah, let's go. Let's do some sound practice. Right? That's always a good place to start, right? Because you get into the kind of sneaky sounds here, and there's quite a few. And so we'll start with just vowel practice. So again, we'll just keep sort of pushing. Like if you just kind of drew a line right here, so you got A, long A, high, long A. I consider them all one vowel with 4 variations, right? It's like Tlingit has, in my brain, Tlingit has 4 vowels, and they each have 4 options, right? But I see it as the same vowel. There's also this O thing, but you hardly ever hear that. If you go inland, you'll hear it, or people say, ho, ho, that's where you'll hear it, right? And I guess when Santa comes around, but other than that, you don't really hear it. So we'll just do these just once so you could just hear them. But the thing to focus on is the consonants are they're just something new, right? They're so new, and people don't go like in English, and so when you think about that, or that kind of sound, you're gonna have to kind of obsess with that for a little while. But what can happen is that obsession translates into ignoring the vowels, because the vowels do things in Tlingit that they don't do in English. So it becomes really easy to just sort of ignore the fact that it's long. So when it's long, we got to keep it long. And when it's high, we got to make sure that we have that tone, right? Because Tlingit has these 2 tones, and English doesn't. English has stress, and Tlingit has stress. But stress is different than tone, right? Stress is just where you put kind of the emphasis, right? And so, for example, if you had a sentence in English where you said, I saw Jim kissing Jane in the park, you could choose where to put the stress, and it affects what you're saying, right? Like I saw Jim kissing Jane in the park. I saw Jim kissing Jane, right? And so those are 2 different stories. Or I guess I saw Jim kissing Jane in the park, right? Like, I don't know why. Like, it's a no kissing park. But Tlingit does have stress like that, but it also has tone. And so the tone is something we got to sort of keep an eye on. All right, let's make these. Ah. 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 Eh. A. Eh. A. E. E. That's all your vowels. That's all of them, right? And so these are some, and we're just going to keep an eye on these as we sort of go along. But I think initially we'll be a little bit sort of consonant focused. And then this one is oh. And so there's a sound in English that doesn't appear in Tlingit. So if I say bat, cat, rat, hat, sat, that particular vowel, it does not exist in Tlingit. So you hear people say this a lot when they'll say at oo, but it should be at oo. It's just closer to a U, or like a sob, like the car, right? So there's 2 things you can put that affect the sort of shape of a vowel at the end. So if you put a W at the end, your lips are curling out. Like people make the duck lip thing became a big sort of sensation. And then if the Y is there, then you're gonna try and like kind of push your mouth into a smile or something. You're gonna pull the corners back, and that's what changes sort of shape of it. It can kind of affect the tone in the EEY one. But when you have those for the AAW, it sounds like ow.
Ow.
And the AAY, I,
I.
you,
You.
E,
E.
ooh.
Ooh.
So those are all your vowels. And so then we just sort of think of there's these regions in the mouth where we're going to make some sounds. There's a couple of tricky ones right here. And then there's a whole bunch of tricky ones right here. Right? It's like the pizza burning zone and the newtie are the ones where we get into the fun area. So this, again, this chart shows, here's these different areas and some examples of sounds. And then basically, if we're looking from left to right here, changing colors, we're starting on the lips and we're going to the back of the throat. If we go from the top of this chart to the bottom, we're I guess, at the top you have how much it stops the airflow, the most to the least, right? Because that's what a consonant does, is it impedes or stops airflow, and that's how your mouth makes those sounds. So this is just kind of information for, and there's terms for all this stuff. We don't always use the terms, like, you know, people were talking about stuff like, they're like, oh yeah, that's an ejective fricative. And I was like, your mama was an ejective fricative. So, yeah, I'm not always big on that. When we get into like the verbs, well, then we're gonna have to start getting into some terminology. But I'm not too worried about the different names of these things. But if you have friends who are linguists, they might be interested in that. There is one like this K apostrophe W sound, the X apostrophe W sound, the underline K apostrophe W sound, and the underline X apostrophe W sound. As far as anybody knows, those sounds aren't found in any other language in the world. So it's kind of neat that Tlingit has these 4 potential unique sounds. I don't think they're in Klingon.
So you have to hear you pronounce those.
Oh, yeah. So for this one, well, I guess we could just do, well, I'll do those first, then we'll do all of these because they're kind of fun. So with the K apostrophe W, this one is quat. 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 Whenever you see that apostrophe, what you have to do is get your mind ready, because you're going to speak without your lungs. And English you don't speak in, like, if you held your breath, there's not any sounds that you make. But what you do is you hold your breath and you make a K sound. That is how you teach yourself how to make these. They call them ejectives, or we call them pinched consonants. And then, so then you're doing the rounded thing as well. And what happens is when you're first making some of these sounds, like if we just say like fermented fish heads, which is ink, ink, ink. A lot of times what happens is you end up going ink, and there's a little bit of a delay, and I think it's totally fine, because your body's like, what are we doing? Why do we tell the lungs to not work anymore, right? But when we speak more, it just ink, so that we get used to that thing, and really we're just closing it off, and then this whole area, the air that's in our throat makes those particular sounds. So then that was the KW, the XW, like boots, un, un, un. So this is a place, there's, if you're gonna make a sound like a Cappuccino Maker, or the wind, it was a windy night, that's where that X sound comes from. That's exactly what that X sound is, without an underline. So when you see an X there, like this, for saw, that sound, that word is husha. So you should be getting that scraping sound up on the pizza burning zone, and not husha. You shouldn't be doing it, because sometimes people, they jump right back to that thing as soon as they see that X, and they'll say hoots, and you're like, what is a hoots? Because I know what a hoots. And then chana is a good example, because you could have chana, which is evening, and chana, which is like my sweetheart, right? So if you were somewhere and your significant other wasn't there and you're trying to talk about how great this evening was, and people are like, what have they been doing?
So pronounce your name.
Une. Une. So that one is over here, like the one with fire. So that one is going back there. So you got that thing that goes. If you're a big snorer, that's like that's the thing that keeps everybody else awake. But to make that, and this sound, Vivian Mork is a Tlingit language teacher, and she gave me the tip. You know, I was teaching a class with her, and she said, if you think of ravens like up in the trees or something, and you look up and you try to make these sounds to them, it helps, because when you look up, that thing kind of relaxes a little bit, right? Because if you're looking down, it gets a little bit harder to make some of those sounds, which is something to think about. I was looking at your book, maybe hold it up, you know, or put it on a screen or something. So if we make that sound, we go. But and that's got to get that good ringing to it, right? But if we hold our breath and make that sound, so there's no lungs, turn the lungs off. That is the gold star sound in Tlingit. And so what you end up doing is, so you're not using your lungs, you're pushing just a little bit of air out, but you're also really kind of forcing that thing against the back of your throat, basically. And then you're getting the rest of that sound out.
And how about not the no underline, but with the cutoff?
Oh yeah, like this one, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so this one, so when we're the Cappuccino Maker, so when we make that sound, and there's no way we can do it without talking about spit, right? It's like, I want to tease my wife. I was like, I should start a parent blog, but this just has like not really useful advice, but like parent tip of the day: get used to boogers, right? It's just like nothing really substantial, but so if you're making that sound, you got to have a lot of spit up on the ridge of your tongue, because that's what makes that scraping sound. If you're trying to, so what you learn how to do is just sort of take a couple kind of bites and get that saliva going, and then you set it on the top of your tongue, and it really helps to make these sounds. And you got to be careful. Like, this is why you don't do sound practice with someone you're facing each other, and they just, maybe a long table. Maybe later you'll get it, you know. So then if we turn your lungs off to make that sound. So your tongue goes right in that same spot, but there's all these muscles have to do a lot of work to push that. There's only a little bit of air there, because you don't breathe when you make that sound. And there, I think there is a little bit of, so if your tongue comes up, then there's this kind of ridge, and that's how you're doing this. When you make that sound, you are pushing it closer to the top of your mouth. That is something I think that just happens.
Oh, that's very helpful.
Can I ask you, I guess first, so which are the 4 sounds that you said aren't in any other language?
Oh yeah, so with the kwa, those 4. So any variation of the K apostrophe W and X apostrophe W.
And so I guess you already said this, but it's new to me, because just that when there's an apostrophe, you're not actually stopping in the middle of the word for a split second. It's just that you're not using your lungs.
That's exactly right. You don't use your lungs to make that consonant sound. That's what that thing, the period, which I don't think is even on here. But when we say like wa or ha Right. Yeah, and like they got it in like Scotland, right? They say like bloody, or in England, don't they say that? Bloody. Yeah, so it's not on here because it's not actually, this chart just shows the actual sounds. When we get into the sound practice, it'll be there. It'll be at the end with Yana 8. Oh, well, let's just say these things, even though there's not the pictures, but just for help get us warmed up. And we'll just go left to right here, I guess. I know maybe we'll just do all the blue, then we'll do all the red. We'll do that. Da, glade, zanti, jenbu, ta, kleshu, tsats, chash, atk, tsatsi, chak, slush, seek, shah, ook, seek, nusk, dashleye, yak. I forgot these guys. Masa, walk. So the M sound is really only in Teslin, some speakers in Atlin, some speakers in Carcross, and one speaker in Angoon. Like, I think he just liked to do it just for fun. Maybe he did. I didn't know him that well. I'm like, they told me he didn't go to Teslin until he was kind of over. Yeah. So you can see the da, ta, ta. And if we focus on what our mouth is doing, da and ta are the same. There's just a little bit sharper on how it's stopping the air. And then is it's completely stopping the air. But the DL and the TL, so if you put, so this is your sa right here. And this is the place that makes your voice in from a Tlingit perspective. So if we go t, 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 and we go da, da, da. So between a T and a D, that's the same sound in our mouth, but we have turned on our vocal cords. So that's another thing we're going to have to just focus on, because later we're going to see some things like that where a T can change to a D. Like that can happen, right? Like that phrase, "Ye hat ye gut," you came here. "Ye hat ye gudi," it changed to a D at the end because we put a vowel on the other side. Okay, let's do the red ones. Gun. Quay, cost, quay, ink, quat, hasha, khwasta, khwan, you. Now to the green. Gooch, Waina, Kak, Kwan, Katesh, Kwat, Khat, Khwagut, Khan, Khwat. That's the yellow. And the yellow's really, oh, there's the glottal on there. I didn't see it. Yeah, thank you. Na'at, ye ana wage, hit. So those are all the sounds in Tlingit, right? And there's lots of them.
So looking up here on Booch, Waina, that same area that we're doing using the G further back from the hard G, are we using that same part with the rest of the underlined K's?
Yeah, yeah. Whenever you get into that green area, that means you're using that little thing that dangles in the back of your throat. Yeah. And then when you're making that underlined G sound, if you want to practice that, you just pretend you're drinking water. Because that's, you probably made that sound at some point in your life. I don't know why people would pretend to drink water. I think I've done it. But yeah, so all of those, and that just helps you just sort of visualize where these sounds come from, compartmentalizing your sort of mouth because you're asking it to do different things. But it also gives you stuff to practice on too. And so if you want to practice, you can look at these words, and if you get bored with these words, you can pick up the dictionary and just grab some ones that start with the letter G and then the underlined G, and you can start with that. And then here's our vowel sets. We did those already. Okay, so we'll just we'll run through these. And you guys have seen the video, so we're just going to do them each probably just once. But I'll do the sound first so we can just look at that sound and think about it. And then when you say the word, so you're looking at that word and you're thinking, how many letters are in this word? Somebody tell me? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? So we also have to continue to train ourselves to see Tlingit as the letters. Like each of these on here is one letter. I guess these aren't. I've got an alphabet poster that I'll put it on our website. And that alphabet poster helps you to sort of see those things too, because they are only like a CH apostrophe. That is one letter. And I think that kind of thing, and the reason why we've sort of transitioned to really trying to push that is because Tlingit has a phonetic alphabet. It is one symbol, one sound, right? Because we were saying, my kids get a little thing and you push the button and it says G makes G, and G makes J. And I was like, and G makes F, and G makes OO, and G, because it makes OUGH makes all these different sounds, right? Like though, through, tough, hiccup. Those are all OUGH sounds. And so Tlingit has a the spelling system makes a lot of sense. So when people ask for Tlingit words, and then they'll say to me, could you write that phonetically? And I say, I just did. Tlingit is a phonetic alphabet, unlike English. English does not have a phonetic alphabet. And so those are some things you can practice, though, is you can count the letters and you can spell it. You can also draw a picture of these things while you're saying the word, because that helps sort of connect your creative side of the brain with the language learning part of your brain. And then you can also make a sentence that's English, preferably from your life experience. And then you would use the Tlingit name, but it would all be a totally English sentence. Like I could say, I think I was 15 the first time I saw a wasus, right? And so that's a true thing from my life, but then you use that wasus in there. Okay. All right. Wasus. Ma. Masus. Cha. Cheech. Cha. Eat. Da. Da. Gla. Glade. This one is the first one in the sound. As we move through these, this is the first one I think that can be really tricky for people. This sound has morphed to a GL sound. Like there's this word we say, which is hadla, D-L-A-A. It means like too much. And it could be used in all kinds of, we'll look at some of these interjections. They're really fun. Because this one, it could be like, dang it. It could also mean shame on you, right? It just kind of depends on how you use it. But so a lot of people will make this into a GL sound with an English L. So they'll say, like I saw these license plates and it'd say hot glah. And I was like, what is hot glah? But that's hadla. And we're shifting to a population that uses our language, but also has, we're shifting them over to similar sounding English things. And so people will say that a lot. They'll say glate instead of glate. And it's an easy shift to make. But this is the first part of this goes da, da, da. And the second part goes sha, sha, sha. When you combine them, the L is very compressed and you get glate, glate, zait, jenwu, jinwu. The Y means, that's how they say it in Yucatan. So if I know And if I remember to put it in there, then I put that. And zait can be a ladder or stairs or a boardwalk or a dock. If it was made out of wood. It has to be boards in a row. Otherwise, a sidewalk, you would just call it the walking road, basically. Akach ana guti day. Or akach ana ati. Akach ya ana ati day. Okay. Sloosh. Sloosh. Ook. Ook. So that one, there's basically, your tongue comes up at a soft point. So it's not like a soft point up behind your teeth. You get a nice little lake of spit on there, and you kind of squish it out the sides. You get and for some people, you get this kind of ringing sound. I hear it from fluent speakers where it goes more like that. But most speakers, it comes out sort of the first version. Ook. Ook. And it's coming out the side. So as you speak Tlingit, you got to really focus on just relaxing your cheeks, right? Because English just requires a little bit more facial tension. And it's not to say anything about like the personality of English speakers, but it's all on the front. It's a lip language. It's living on the lips. Whereas Tlingit, you can do so much, and you can speak Tlingit without your lips, basically. You know, you could just, and I've seen speakers they kind of got this thing that they do with their mouth, and they're just really speaking, and their lips hardly ever even touch.
Can I ask you for that one though, you're not just holding air in your lungs.
For this L, because this one you're gonna breathe. This one you're gonna hold your breath. All of them, they have the same. It's the same mechanism, and I think focusing on what your lungs do does help. And so, Zeus, we're having a conversation, and we're just talking about like linguistics and Tlingit and stuff, and we're just really geeking out. And my little brother was there, and I think he was 17. And he just says, "What's linguistics?" He's getting frustrated, and I said, "Zeus, tell him what's linguistics." And so he said a couple of things which were kind of interesting. But one of the things was he said, people tend to talk with their hands a lot. Some people more than others. But he said, if you just did this kind of experiment where you had two people sit down and sit on their hands and just talk and try to keep talking, there'd be something uncomfortable about that. And what he said is they did this study, and what your hands do is they function as a timing mechanism for your body. Because breathing is natural. You can breathe when you sleep, you can breathe, and you don't really have to think about breathing too much. If you're a runner or something, yes, or if you have some lung difficulties, yes, but typically it's not something you have to think about. But when you're any language, you're stopping the air and you're making it do these little puffs and all this other stuff, and so it takes work. And so the hands kind of help the body. So as you do things like shutting your lungs off, and you might think of hand gestures and things that just kind of help. And with the tone, when you see the tone, usually like Donna, those things might help. And you don't have to always talk like that, you know. It's like, but I think as you're practicing, it does help associate when you see that thing that you could raise your eyebrows, you could do something. But I think those things do help. And so especially as you're going further, if you find that you're shortening your vowels all the time, maybe you're doing something that whenever you see those long vowels, to just sort of focus on them. But yeah, so that one stops the lungs. Noosk. 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 So when you get that KW at the end, it goes k, right? So that it's got this little breath of air at the end. So that if you had a little candle, noosk, you would blow that little candle out. Seek, seek, speak, speak, shaw, shaw, tia, tia, Tlingit. And this one is controversial. So sometimes people have it Tlingit, where it's long. I think I even have it earlier as long. I've seen it long, I've seen it short, I've seen it written with an L, I've seen it written with a TL. I've heard people say that a TL is wrong. I've had, Nora wrote this and she was probably, so there's somewhere there's variance. I think there's variance and that's totally okay. There are other people who have told me it's a moth and there's other people who have told me it's a butterfly. So I got kind of a butterfly looking moth. I don't know. And so there's some things that as I teach this, I just try to say it could be a regional thing. And these things vary too. There's different animals that have different names, or you go places, like when I was in Minnesota, they wouldn't say, can you loan me $5? They'd say, can you borrow me $5? And so they use a different word for it. And some people say soda and some people say pop. And so you'll find that with Tlingit as well. And so I try to sort of document those things when I could see them. And then, did I talk about the double A thing at the end in here? So typically, Tlingit has, I think, 2 types of word. And so when we do this and we're practicing, we're learning nouns. And in Tlingit, a noun is not a person, place, or thing. A noun is something's name. So what we're doing is we're just learning the names of all these things, right? And it's really neat because you're also getting to know these things in a different way. So if you think of something that lives here, like a raven, and these things have been here for as long as anybody knows. And for as long as anybody knows, we've called them yay. So you are calling this thing the same thing that people did 5,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago, and that's really fun. But when they're really short, 1-syllable letters, I think those are really old things. Like when Tlingit people first get here 20,000 years ago, those things are probably here. Or they saw them somewhere else and they knew what those things were called. Some of the newer things get longer names, and those names usually translate to something. So like, or they're borrowed. They come from another, with another language, like Wasus. In Haida, it's called moose moose, which probably comes from moo moo or something like that. But some of them have meaning. And when they're usually 2-syllable names that end with this ah, that ah is a pronoun that's gotten frozen at the end of the word, which means the ones that do whatever comes before it. So usually right before it, you're going to have a verb root, and the verb root has meaning. And the meaning of T is to chisel. So the chisel is the one that chisels. And I don't know what came first, chiseling or the chisel, right? So we've had those, we've been making those things forever because we call a totem pole ku-tia. And the ku part means some round or cylindrical thing. Okay. Sa, tsatsi, yak, gooch, cost, incheyi, Yeah, that sounded great. Because sometimes there's a habit where if you see this pinch thing, then the next consonant, like you go, it gets hard to sort of get out of that mode. So then you just gotta look at them and just making this connection between your eyes and your brain and your body. Husha. So there's that double A thing. So what do you think hush is? To cut or to saw. The one who saws. So that's a good one because it's got that sound on both sides, right? So as you go, every time you go to the grocery store, say it, right? Just say and just say all these things, right? It's fun. You you can be a part of putting Tlingit just out in the world. And I think that's really exciting.
The same as for a wild crab apple?
No, and actually it used to be. I think there's only a few things. So used to be a crab apple. Now this, like just one you get in the grocery store. And so that name gets given to the apple, and then the crab apple becomes Tlingit apple, right? Which is really what it translates to. So there's another one, Kuch, which is rice. Kuch, actually that name didn't change. So we know that Kuch is rice, but Kuch is also the rice that's found under the chocolate lily. Kach is a chicken, but there used to be something else, and now we call it Tlingit kach. What do you think it is? Grouse. Grouse. The ptarmigan was a good guess, but it's a grouse. There's, let's see, kunz is now, this one's weird because we've had potatoes for a long time, but kunz is potato. Tlingit kunzi is swamp hemlock roots. And the swamp hemlock is poisonous, so don't, I don't know what the association is, so I don't want people to go. I once brought herring eggs when I was in a creative writing program, and then they're like, what is this on? I was like, hemlock. Like, isn't that what killed like Socrates or something? It's like, it was a different hemlock. We don't eat poisons. And she just wouldn't eat it. She wouldn't even try it. It's like, you're not Socrates. Get out of here. Let's see. I know that there's at least one other.
I learned that shock.
Yes, that's it. So shock is a strawberry, but now that is the big one you get in the grocery store. Tlingit shock is the little ones that grow wild. So I don't know why, because there's a lot of other things that get some, nowadays if we're going to name something, like there wasn't a name for celery. So we worked with some elders and we just came up with so then that's the white man's wild celery, right? So I'm like, how come it didn't go that way? So
then when now we're going into the 21st century, how does what deal with new words?
Yeah.
Technology words, that comes up.
So
who comes up with the word?
We usually have a pretty organic process, which sometimes we end up being in conflict, and sometimes someone like, oh, well, we came up with a word for that. And so as I'm working on this kind of new dictionary, which you guys can get off of tlingitlanguage.com, I've been trying to put them in there, and I try to put a new one out every couple months because, and some of them get really long, right? So like telephone is, kachis is a short word for telephone, and it really just means wire. But the word that we came up with for telephone was which is a thing that people talk through. But then a cell phone became the pocket thing that we talk. But then, but then people are like, well, what about iPhone? I'm like, just say iPhone. just say Android. Just don't. So my philosophy is to name the things, but not to name all the brands of the things. Because we got the same thing too. If someone wanted PlayStation 4 and something like we could, but I don't know if that's the best use of time. But usually you and this is how it's been working for a long time, is some of these things have pretty short names like this. But then the newer things, they get this name that gets manufactured. Like playground is place where people play, right? So usually it just translates directly to what happens there. And so as we've been sort of making new curriculum, sometimes translating things, sometimes making new things, we work with our speakers to try and come up with some kind of name for things. All right, are we gonna get through here? Then we have to call it, because the art auction is gonna happen. Guasha. So what do you think guash is? To stab. But it's also to punch, and it's also to beat a drum. So you gotta be kind of careful, because you're like, I don't know, I guess if you punch someone and then stab them and then play the drum, You could use the same verb for all of them. Before you go to J. On Quayi. Ya. Quat. Zisk. So I put this one in there because this K, all the W sounds, like the KW, the XW, they sound different when they're at the end. So if it's at the beginning, you get kwa. If it's at the end, you get ak. You get that little puff of air at the end that blows out that candle. Kwasta. Ga. Kwan. Z. Gooch. Gooch. Kuk. Kuk. Same thing, at that little puff of air at the end. Even though you gotta do a lot of work to get that sound. Kuk. Katesh. 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 So this one, you're using your lungs. Ka. 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 And this one you're not. And your mouth is, you're gonna get tired. I get tired every time I do this, and so. Khat, khat, on, Quina, Quina, Quan, Quan. There's going to be some words in here that start with this long dash. That means there has to be another noun before it. It belongs to something. And in this, you're usually going to say a place, right? Like New Jersey, Quan would be the people of New Jersey, right? But a lot of times, this is going to be sort of there's a cultural component too, because Tlingit is made up of sort of states within the nation. Akut, Jishkat. And so that's how you would that's how the Tlingit world is kind of organized. And we'll look at that a couple of chapters from here when we start getting into introductions and where people are from and where you live, because the Quan is historically a part of that. Na, 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 quat, quat, sheikh, sheikh, shanakhwayi, shanakhwayi, hunch, hunch, quat, quat, nech, nech, yana 8, yana 8, hit, hit, Yijin tuck night touch okay. Any other questions? Okay, so you guys got your next set of videos, and then this will be 2 weeks until we get together, and we can certainly do a couple things over email. But just sort of looking at and thinking of a schedule that we can work with. One of the things I was thinking was starting to talk about how you can integrate this knowledge into your work, so into your curriculum. And so it certainly could be just teaching the language. But one of the things that I think made places like Hawaii really effective was their goal was to use the language to teach concepts. And we're not there yet as a region, but we want to get there by taking small steps, which would be putting Tlingit language into all kinds of different things. And one of the things we're going to take something head on here, is there's people out there who will just say, you can't teach that in Tlingit, but they've never even tried, and they don't know anything about Tlingit. But so we want to just sort of put the language out there so it's more normalized. the other things that people say is you can't put these place names back. Nobody knows how to say them. And people just kind of say this stuff, and I don't think they're like super hardcore racists, but it is a racist ideology. Because one is, if you say nobody can pronounce that, is one, you assume that the people who can speak Tlingit are a bunch of nobodies, or that we don't exist, or that two, human beings can't learn other languages, because humans can learn, anybody can learn a language. It's harder for some than others. And so one of the things that I certainly encourage is avoiding saying, oh, I can't make that sound. And even just the subtle switch to say, boy, that one's really hard for me. And it's fine to acknowledge how difficult it is. But one of the things that happens is learning a language and learning Tlingit is much different than a lot of other things. Because as you learn content, you're adding to all the stuff you already know. Whereas Tlingit, it's a whole new set of concepts. It's a different way of thinking. It's a different way of sort of dealing. It's a whole new set of grammar and sounds and concepts that are going to be coming in and affecting the way that you think about things. And it's going to be fun. Maybe 3-4 years from now, you can look at something and you can think about it in 2 languages simultaneously. That's really a fun point to get to. But so we got until the end of October, but the next time we get together, which will be the 13th, I would like us to just start, we'll have a conversation about what kind of ideas you could have. And what I'd like to see is when you do your presentations, is you're just showing us some lesson that uses some Tlingit. And it doesn't have to be like fully, like, I'm going to now teach people the guitar in Tlingit, right? It doesn't have to be something crazy like that. Don't translate poetry. Don't get into that stuff. That stuff is really hard. But instead, start integrating some commands and some nouns and some other stuff into something you already know how to teach. That's what I would really recommend, because a lot of my language students, even in intermediate Tlingit, we've been doing this for 1.5 years, and they'll say, okay, I'm going to do it. And they have this big idea. And the idea is really neat. But as once they get in there, it is really hard. And so think of things that aren't really, really hard, but maybe we can have conversations about how we might get there for some of that stuff. And so what I'm expecting to see in a class like this is just the seed of an idea, and maybe something that can start to just normalize the language, say, oh yeah, and here's some Tlingit, because we live in Tlingit country. That's not unusual whatsoever. And so those types of things, I think, go a long ways to creating positive change. Okay. All right, Cheesh gang, go rest your throats and get back at it.
Robin Davis couldn't make it here, but he emailed you. Did he try to register that the class is closed?
Oh yeah, well no, the class was full. And so I had them add more seats, right? I sent him a message.
Take care.
Yeah.
That's good.